Maranatha. That became a very popular, I'm not sure if that was John Mayne or not. It wasn't. Okay, so the Maranatha became the in-breath and out-breath. Or it could be Jesus love you, or God, whatever was meaningful to you. So that still is helpful. Whenever you're getting a word, then your attention is drawn back to that mantra or that breath. Now the second one has been developed by Thomas Keating in terms of centering prayer. And I actually did for about probably maybe 10 to 20 years, I did the breathing. And I have to tell you, it was difficult to shift, but I have now, I'm wedded to the centering prayer, because it's a little different. It actually, there's a word involved, but not quite the same way. So they say the word finds you, but let's say my word is trust. And so I set the intention, and then I start to say trust. As a thought comes by, if it doesn't stay, you don't have to say the word again. But let's say I start thinking about this afternoon's process, which I will probably do as we sit. And I'll start going, and what should I do and how should I change it? So what you just simply say is trust. And then what the visual might be, you're dropping down, you're dropping in to that depth, and you're letting go. It's more of a surrendering prayer. You're letting go of that thought. Don't react to that thought. Don't be angry with yourself that all you're doing is thinking. If you start doing that, say your word. Let it go. Thomas Keating tells this story that a sister was in one of his workshops, and for the 20 minutes that she said to him, I couldn't do 10,000 things I was thinking about. I never could do it. I didn't do it. And he said, oh, that's great. That's 10,000 times you came back to God. So it's like you can't do it wrong, you just keep letting go. The idea being is you're emptying your rational mind that wants to just get you. Your ego doesn't like it when it's quiet. If you're silent, something's going to come in and fill it. But this, all you do is say the word. Start again, say the word. And then at some point you move into this greater silent place. Cynthia Bourgeot likens it to when you fall asleep. You don't know the moment when you fall asleep, but you fall asleep. And you're not to fall asleep now, mind you. But even that, if you do, then just come back to the word, or when I gong, you wake up. But I would encourage you, if you have your own practice, do it. But if you don't, or you want to develop one, try either that following your breath or a mantra, or this kind of word and dropping down. And the Spirit works amazing things. So even if you've never done it, who knows what will happen? But don't expect to feel. What it is this opening up. It's this surrendering to. Okay? So what I'm going to invite us to do is really sit for 20 minutes and in contemplative silence. And then we'll just do a little process and a song to end this morning prayer, and then we'll take a break, so at about 10:30ish. So would you then make sure you're comfortable in your chair, nothing on your lap. Well, make sure cell phones are off, please. Speaking of which, I better make sure mine is. And just get in touch with which of these processes you're going to stick with today. Don't shift midstream. Just go with one of them, or your own, and stick with it. And then set the intention that you are open to the divine working within you. Okay? And then we'll sit, and I'll have a chime at the end of that 20 minutes. All right? So if you will, we will simply know that the presence of God is within us, among us, beyond us, and we're opening ourselves to that, our willingness to have the divine work within us.
Be still, be quiet, and know the God within.
Thank you. Way in the back.
Thank you.
The one word that was up on the board was the word breathe. And I couldn't help but think about the sisters that aren't here who have trouble breathing. We have Elaine, we have Rosie. We have a lot of sisters who, are heading towards their last breath. I don't mean to be so blunt with it, but that was my prayer. And it was to really, they're not here, and I miss that. I miss not having that total group here, but that meant something to me to really get into that moment with the word breath and breathe and realize that's a gift for us. For others, it's a labor.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, then let's just hold in gratitude the two sisters who shared. And we're going to bring closure to this with the song, Consciousness Waking. So take the song sheet out of your piece. It's a mantra. So if you don't know it, you will by the end. You all hear that?
Consciousness waking, holy and whole, creation stirring, birthing anew. Now is the time, we are the stakes for the holy to rise in our midst.
with that, we have a break. All right. Now, again, the rest of the morning, you'll have to be listening to me. Sorry. But I want to set this context because we're going to be talking about your graced moments in the congregation this afternoon. However, we are living, I believe, in a graced time. And that as religious women, these past 40, 50 years have been very significant. And it's part of a much larger shift in consciousness that's occurring within the human species. So I want to place your history in the largest context we can. Because as you think about the future, some of this might impact it, as you think about how you want to enter the future. As you can, right now, we probably don't think it's a great grace time, because I suspect, as with systems thinkers, and that's a school of thought, that we experience this chaos. And they talk about when a system is in chaos, when a time, and I'm going to suggest that as we are evolving in our evolutionary journey, we are at a time of chaos. And why? Because what they say is that trends that bring the system to the present state break down. Now just think about that in terms of what's happening. We know when Bernie Sanders ran for the presidency, he spoke about how things had to change. But the problem was we didn't know how to do it in certain ways. When I studied political science, I learned all about treaties, the UN, how we take care of political prisoners. You don't behead them, you don't torture. The whole series of things that we've developed over time. But what do we have today? We have third-party actors, correct? And we would call them terrorists for the most part, and other people would call them liberationists or freedom fighters. Any of you who worked in Central America probably remember how that tension existed in the 80s. And so we don't know what to do. So President Obama, when he wants to try to negotiate, you get a huge outcry. How can you negotiate with them? We can't. We don't know what to do. Think about climate change. You know, Mr. Trump may think he can build a wall and keep our Mexican neighbors out, but you can't build a wall up and over and think that our air and the quality of the weather systems are going to be kept out, that we are not going to be victim to what we are doing to the environment. Now, the problem is, of course, right now, the way that our democratic system operates is a lot of subcommittees. So we really have in the Senate a committee for energy and a separate committee for climate change. You can't address the problem when it's all separated and sort of silo thinking. So I believe we are at a chaos time. It cannot return to its prior state, and I think this is what gets us into sort of the tensions that we're feeling. If the systems thinkers are correct, we can't go backwards. So when you hear Mr. Trump say, "Make America great again," what he's hearkening to, and I believe desires, is a return to a past that probably really never existed, but which in fact was more male dominant, white, English speaking, and Judeo-Christian. And so he is playing on the fears and the concerns of people who at this point are confused, as I think all of us are. Because at a time of chaos, at chaos point, things seem to be breaking down. And we don't know yet where to go, what's happening. So it's launched, though, irreversibly on a new trajectory. And either it's going to continue to break down, it won't return to the happy days. It's going to go down, or it'll be a breakthrough. And I think we can and are part of that breakthrough as we continue. Because the level of change, which we are talking about then, is multiple. But what's significant is at the level of consciousness. Albert Einstein says, we cannot solve the problems at the same level of consciousness that created them. I'm sure you've heard that, but I think it's worth repeating. We cannot solve the problems that are facing us with the same level of consciousness that created them. I think that's at every level of our life. It's our political level, it's ecclesial. We think we can bring back people in the church in the same way we did it before. I think under a couple of our pontiffs, if only we would return to the catechism, we'd remember we all did the same thing, we'd return. We can't. And religious life. We won't be able to face the future if we still keep coming out of the past without a new sense of what we have to do or who we have to be. So what is this level of consciousness? And we oftentimes, you hear people talk about consciousness. Lots of people study it. So I don't pretend to be the expert on this. What I want to do, though, is describe it for you. Consciousness is really how we view the world. It's our assumptions, it's our biases, it's our worldview. And it's like the air we breathe. We're not always aware of it until something comes to disturb it. I think a great example for this is the clerical abuse scandal. As I think all of us in this room, with a rare exception I think, grew up at a time when we would never have conceived of a priest abusing a child. And because we could not conceive of it, we could not see it. We only can see what our consciousness allows us to see. And so it became sort of a shock when this revelation started to happen, correct? And what all of a sudden you started realizing that what you thought was real wasn't. And so you probably had almost the stages of grief. If you had worked with one of these men or knew them, Bill wouldn't have done that. Father Bill could never have done that. And then let's say the facts actually came out that he did. I suspect you were angry. You got felt betrayed. You were probably lashing out. You didn't know quite what to do with those feelings. And then eventually you had to make sense of it. You had to reintegrate it. But everything started to get reintegrated. And I would suspect at this point, no one will ever look at the priesthood again with the same thing that we did earlier. It's not going backwards. Now I give that example because I think we're not always, we think, well, our consciousness is pretty good. No, we're all shaped by different things. And the kind of evolutionary process is to keep sort of widening it and helping us to see things in new ways. Because it is the lens through which we interpret reality. Those of you, I know you all knew the IHMs, right? The habit that we had. A gorgeous blue habit, right? Beautiful, beautiful. But a bonnet, if you remember, had like a horseshoe. And it's funny, ours still cover the eyes, but the Philly IHMs, because in history everything got doubled from Monroe to Philly, so theirs extended further. Their sleeves were longer than ours, but the idea was there, that this headdress, all you could see was what was in front of you. Think of that as consciousness, all you see. And then, very interesting, as renewal continued, for our congregation, the thing that started getting changed was this. We started cutting it back, cutting it back, cutting it back until we removed it. Think about that in terms of consciousness. It's the lens through which you see reality. And as you engage and enter into shifts of consciousness, you're going to keep widening it. Now, the danger, not the danger, but the problem is just like when you're realizing what happened to the clerical abuse scandal, lots of people don't want to keep moving. They want to sort of go back or feel safe in their consciousness that they're working on. So if you think your kids are always going to be better off than you were, we've got lots of stuff in our culture that keeps us tied to a worldview. I'm only worth what I do. How has that seeped into religious life? I'm only worth what I get, what kind of things I have. So those kind of levels of consciousness are all around us and in us. But in fact, consciousness can change. And so I want to change and develop in an evolutionary way. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the word developmental, because I think for a lot of us it connotes hierarchy. You know, one is better than the other. That's not how this is used. It's actually used, the word that is used in these theorists is holarchy. Holocchary. Holarchy. And what does that mean? Take a good example. Take the letter A. That letter stands alone and has meaning, correct? Add another couple letters to it, and you get a word. It's a different meaning, it's more complex, correct? But every letter is important. Add a couple of words, and you get a sentence. Couple of sentences, you get a paragraph, you get a page, a story, get chapters, on and on. But what's happening is each level of addition complexifies that initial letter and is more inclusive of more letters, okay? So that's the way development is not higher. It doesn't mean that a long, complex sentence is better than the individual letters, right? You couldn't do one without the other, but you now are at a level of more complexity. So you don't just speak in letters. You don't just speak in minimal little tiny combinations. You could, but you don't. Our physical development. You know, we're learning that if we don't learn how to crawl, we will not develop everything in our brain, or we'll not have all the capacity, I guess. Now, when we go for lunch, if the sisters and those back tables start to crawl out that door, I think that's exactly what we do. Either laugh or say, oh my God, what's happening, you know? All right, because why? Not because we couldn't crawl, although parentheses, maybe some of us can't. But it's not that we've lost the capacity to crawl, but we no longer use it as our dominant way of walking, correct? But let's say a fire started. Charlene just was smoking in her office. All of a sudden the flames come in, smoke is pouring in, then we would want to crawl, correct? Yes. You'd want to, okay. So the idea being is in these, quote, stages of development, and if the theorists are correct, we all go through the stages at different times. I mean, we all have to go through them sequentially, but we're going to be at different stages. We all have access to the earlier stages, but we act out of one in a more dominant way, okay? So I want you to recall that, because I'm going to be drawing on the work of Ken Wilber and Don Beck. And Ken Wilber is a philosopher who for about the last, I want to say 20 years, possibly more, has really been a significant thinker in trying to look at what has happened with modernity, or our whole rational way of thinking, and how we have to complement it, once again, with other ways of knowing. So he's developed this integral theory, I-N-T-E-G-R-A-L. And it's now, you'll see it, integral psychology, integral spirituality, integral everything, okay? And Don Beck worked with him. The two of them collaborated early on. Now they have come into some sort of little tiff or whatever over the years. But Don Beck has applied it to cultures and tribes, so the collective consciousness. So they both say that the individual consciousness and the collective consciousness can change and evolve in developmental stages.